in collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, thousands of Cypriots take to the streets to support gay pride.
They are an important message of hope, especially for those young people who are still coming out and need role models they can look up to, and people who will show them that they don't need to be afraid.
BirdLife Cyprus and flyway conservation in the Mediterranean.
After the illegal hunting of protected species, the next problem is spring hunting. Spring is the season when Europe's birds are returning from their wintering grounds to Europe to breed and raise the next generation. These are the survivors of the bird world. If you kill them before they breed, naturally the impact on the population is far more drastic than if you were to actually let them breed.
Britain's former Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott talks about climate change.
But globally facing up to the obligations of targets in cutting carbon in order to meet the concerns of the scientists that if we allow carbon to increase the way it was, we'll face the terrible consequences that will come from that.
Last weekend saw probably the biggest gathering of citizens that certainly I've seen in Cyprus in the almost 40 years I've been here. Accept LBGT Cyprus organised the first ever Gay Pride March. They were hoping about 300 people would turn out to support their demand for equal rights, and both they and I think all the people who did show up were amazed at the turnout. There were thousands. There was a carnival atmosphere as people piled into Nicosia's central Eleftheria Square, with rainbow flags everywhere fluttering defiantly in the early evening breeze. Vociferous attacks in the previous week by the church had encouraged counter-demonstrators to take to the streets, but when they became violent, the police took action, and when the Pride March finally got underway, it went off peacefully, with some 4,500 people, mostly, it must be said, straight people, marching to support the gay lobby, walking to the park next to the Parliament, where they partied late into the night. Turkish Cypriots also joined the event. Siliz Bilim, of the Turkish Cypriot group Queer Cyprus, was one of the speakers at the start of the event.
Taking the step for organising the first Pride in Cyprus. We are very happy and proud to be here, part of it. And what more can I wish? Only to have no borders in Cyprus one day. One Cyprus, one love. Thank you.
I would like now to ask Gabi Kaleha from International Lesbian and Gay Association from Europe, from Brussels. She's here with us together with the entire board of ILGA Europe to address everybody. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor for us and a pleasure to be here with you today in this historic moment for the LGBT community of Cyprus. Some people ask why such events are necessary, but really they are an important message of hope, especially for those young people who are still coming out and need role models they can look up to, and people who will show them that they don't need to be afraid. So we really encourage the government and your political leaders to act and to deliver on their promises, especially on the civil partnership bill, which I know you have been discussing. Because as you say, it is one love, and our love deserves the equal recognition before the law. So we wish you well, and we're really happy to be marching with you today.
Was Gabriela Kaleha, co-chair of ILGA in Brussels, and the whole of the board of ILGA came to Cyprus to support the event. Representatives of political parties also spoke at the start, and then the organisers sprang a surprise. Anna Vissi, a Cypriot singer with a huge following on the island and abroad, appeared. She had this to say.
Για να δικαιολογήσω τη συμμετοχή μου εδώ, ήρθα με πολύ αγάπη
I came here with lots of love because my conscience guided me to support Cyprus's first gay pride. I am very glad that it's happening here in our Cyprus, and I would like from now on simply to see people happy here and all over the world. Whatever they have chosen to be, the way Mother Nature intended them to be. I grew up in a family that taught me to respect people and their values, their kindness, honesty, their passion for life, their courage and dignity, and not by their choice of who they love and who loves them. We know that there will always be racism. Let's not be the ones who propagate it. Perhaps this way, one day we will beat it. I believe our mind is our strongest point, and it is so simple that it has already been said by poets and painted by artists. As John Lennon once said,
"Don't hate what you don't understand."
It is very simple in my opinion that, no matter the colour of our skin, no matter where we were born, no matter our different beliefs, the one thing we have in common is equal rights in love and life. And from now on, also in the law.
Anna Vissi speaking at the Gay Pride March held last weekend in Nicosia. This is the Cyprus News Digest.
You can listen anytime, anywhere to the Cyprus News Digest by subscribing to the podcast.
There's been a capacity building for flyway conservation in the Mediterranean workshop taking place in Nicosia. Joining me on the programme today, Claire Thompson from BirdLife International and Jeffrey Saliba from BirdLife Malta. Claire, you were dealing, I think, with the threats to migratory birds in the Mediterranean region. So what actually were you talking about today?
Okay, well, essentially, so there are three main threats to migratory birds in the Mediterranean region. One is the illegal killing of migratory birds and hunting threats to migratory birds, which obviously applies to Cyprus, but also a lot of other countries in the Mediterranean region, such as BirdLife Malta, who's with us at the moment. And the BirdLife International is a partnership of conservation organisations, and so we are in a very good position to address the threats to migratory birds because we can link conservation organisations along the birds' flyways. So in this particular workshop, we've basically brought a number of partners together who've been working to address the key threats to migratory birds in the region to discuss how they can work better together along the flyway to protect these species.
And that's the essence, isn't it? Because we're talking about birds that every year fly over both Cyprus and indeed Malta. And there does seem, certainly in Cyprus, and I'm sure in a minute Jeffrey will tell me whether it's the same in Malta, there does seem to be a sort of feeling in Cyprus that there are birds and we can do what we like with them. But in actual fact, they're not, are they? They're flying from somewhere else to somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit like getting murdered in the motel, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, again, I guess that's the strength of the BirdLife International Partnership is that actually nationally, a lot of the organisations are protecting their species, often species that are breeding in their country, but they don't pay so much attention to the fact that there are some of these species that are either for northern countries migrating down south, and so they need to collaborate with southern partners, and also in the case of southern partners they need to get support from northern partners. And I think there's a tendency, due to a lack of capacity most of the time, because NGOs are so busy focusing on tackling their national issues, to actually see beyond that and work at a regional level, which is what this workshop was trying to encourage.
And what, of course, needs to be done if it is to protect entire species in some cases, and in many cases threatened species. If we come to the Malta situation, I know that I've been reading a lot about it in the last couple of months. Internationally, it hit the headlines, as Cyprus has done in the past. Tell us a bit about how bird hunting takes place in Malta. Here in Cyprus we tend to use lime sticks and mist nets as well as shoot them. Is it the same in Malta?
In Malta it's slightly different. The main problem in Malta is the shooting, and in addition the use of nets. So I always say there's three key problems with hunting in Malta. The first is the illegal shooting of protected species. There's a saying back home, you fly, you die. After the illegal hunting of protected species, the next problem is spring hunting. Spring is the season when Europe's birds are returning from their wintering grounds to Europe to breed and raise the next generation. These are the survivors of the bird world. If you kill them before they breed, naturally the impact on the population is far more drastic than if you were to actually let them breed. For this reason, spring hunting is not permitted in the EU. But Malta keeps fighting for a spring hunting season and keeps opening a spring hunting season every year.
And does it get away with it, or have you been brought to task by the European Union? Have you been fined, for example?
Malta was taken to the European Court of Justice over its spring hunt, and it was actually found guilty of breaching the birds directive by permitting spring hunting. Nevertheless, the government every year since almost has opened a spring hunting season. It's applied restrictions, set quotas for the number of birds which may be legally shot down. However, to be perfectly honest with you, there are significant problems with the derogation that Malta is applying. Key amongst them is the fact that there's literally thousands of hunters in a very small countryside. I mean, Cyprus and Malta are islands, but Malta's 22 kilometers long. So you can imagine that thousands of hunters in an area 22 kilometers long translates to coverage of a significant area.
It must mean an absolute slaughter.
It does. On good days, you can count up to 1,000 shots in one location in one morning alone. So that's a lot of birds being gunned down. Add on to that the issue of illegal hunting of protected species, where anything, particularly rare birds that come over, are targeted often within minutes of their arrival. For particularly rare birds like eagles or storks, we actually have to mount a 24/7 watch on them with the police, and even that does not guarantee their safety.
All right, it's obviously a really serious situation, and particularly worrying is the fact that there are endangered species among those that are shot. You talk about hunters probably who do know the difference but don't care. Here in Cyprus, of course, with the mist nets and the lime sticks, it is totally indiscriminate. So it's not a question of somebody not caring or caring. They just take whatever's trapped.
I guess that's why, so BirdLife Cyprus in particular have been trying to increase public support for banning illegal trapping in Cyprus. So they've been working on developing a strategic action plan for addressing illegal trapping in Cyprus. And in order to get that strategic plan accepted and implemented in Cyprus, they need to change the public view of illegal trapping and help the public understand that if we do continue with indiscriminate trapping of birds, migratory bird species, then a lot of these species are indeed endangered, and they will probably disappear from the flyways.
Now, you talk about getting a strategy together to presumably, protect flyways? How would it work? Would you have certain, if you like, channels or highways that hunting would be totally banned in?
So in terms of the strategy itself, it's actually looking at the issue of reducing illegal killing and hunting threats, but it's actually also looking at a number of other threats. So one of the other threats to migratory birds along this flyway is actually energy sector development, so development of wind farms and also power lines. So birds often, as they're flying down, migrating, they collide with the wind turbines and the power lines. And so that's another really important threat that we're trying to address through this project strategy. And then another important focus of the strategy beyond the illegal killing problem is also the conservation of key stopover sites. So as the birds migrate down the flyway, they will stop off at a number of sites where they don't stop to breed, but they just stop to feed and as they continue their journey down. And those key sites are also an integral part of, or protecting those key sites are an integral part of this strategy. So the important thing about the strategy is that it's addressing a series of threats. It's not just focusing on the threats that are currently being addressed, say, in Cyprus. And I think even in Malta, although at the moment illegal killing is a really big issue, I think the wind energy sector is now also coming onto the agenda in terms of wind energy development.
Are you hopeful that you can get past what, certainly in Cyprus, and it sounds like in Malta, is a deep-seated tradition that the local people say is their right, and who are all these foreigners coming and interfering?
With regards to Malta, I think it is really visible the extent to which the people are fed up of the situation. To give you an idea of what it is like, Malta is pretty much a nightmare when it comes to birds. We have no breeding birds of prey, although we have had in the past. They were shot to extinction, local extinction, in the 80s. I went for a walk during the lunch break today. It's my first day here in Cyprus. And I saw a crow species. Again, we don't have any in Malta, shot to extinction in the 80s. Very often, you cannot really go for a walk in the countryside. Lead shots raining down on you, hunters shooting from nearby. And it is very clear that people are fed up of this situation. People do want these birds to be breeding again. People do want to be able to go out in the countryside and enjoy a walk and the sight of birds.
And the bird song.
And the bird song. And in fact, what we have nowadays is a good 17% of the electorate is actually calling on government to hold a referendum asking the Maltese public whether it wants to ban spring hunting. 17% of the electoral register has signed a petition calling for this. That is the extent to which the Maltese public is fed up with the situation. They're fed up with political maneuvering by government and opposition. They're fed up with the Maltese government, European Commission ping-pong, and they've decided, right, we really need to do something about this.
Claire Thompson and Geoffrey Saliba talking there about the Conservation Flyways workshop held recently in Nicosia. Don't forget, if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email cyprusnewsdigest@gmail.com.
Online and as a podcast, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Lord Prescott has been in Cyprus because the Council of Europe has been meeting in Nicosia. He's on the Environment Committee and he's got some interesting views on how we can bring global targets to bear so that there's agreement that can be implemented, because, as I'm sure you know, the Kyoto Agreement hasn't really been implemented across the globe and we're heading for tough climate decisions. John, thanks for joining me. What is it that you think can get us out of this sort of quagmire and stalemate we've been in now for several years?
Well, I've been doing it for 20 years, and in 1997, when they met at Kyoto, I was sent by Tony Blair leading the European delegation to negotiate that Kyoto Agreement. Most of the countries were only industrial countries that agreed to set a target. Accepting the science, if we allow carbon to continue the way it does, it will affect the temperature of the world and the climate. Everybody accepts that. Scientists have continually confirmed it. But we agreed that the next stage, Kyoto 2, would come after the first 12 years. In 2012, that technically finished. We're now talking about how do you implement the second global agreement. And the real problem is it's for 190 odd nations, not 46. That's not easy. 190 nations, some are very rich, have developed like the rich countries have on high carbon growth economies, and the low ones like China, India, all those were desperately wanting to reduce their unemployment and poverty levels. But we need a global agreement. The idea that Kyoto principle of a legal framework for everybody to apply, you can't get it. The Americans don't want it. Chinese are hesitant about it. Indians aren't too happy either. So if we face another situation where a few leaders get together like they did in 2010, American President Gordon Brown from England, and say, can we fix it, chaps? No, you cannot. And I said at that time, you now must extend the period so the agreement of Kyoto can be extended for about 4 or 5 years to 2015. But we must negotiate an agreement. So what is the agreement? If you do Kyoto and said everybody's got to have a legal framework, we must all set the targets. I don't know what we do if they don't do it, because America didn't do it, Australia didn't. So how can you have that legal framework which recognises cutting carbon? That's what the scientists tell us. We must do that.
Do the world leaders who are dealing with this problem recognise it? There's still a lot of scepticism about the science, and you regularly read
No, I don't think there's any scepticism anymore. Well, look, if there were let's say we had 100 engineers, 99 of them were saying that bridge is unsafe, and one says it's not, it's okay, continue. Well, quite frankly, that's where we are with science at the moment. Every report, UN, of 2,000 scientists confirms it's getting worse. Yeah?
So why aren't world leaders taking that on board? And
well, I think there are real political problems. If you say to people who are in Kyoto, the steel industry, the car industry, all came and opposed us because it means fundamental changes in the way we develop our economy. Now, that's a heck of a political problem. In America, they didn't want to say to their coal mines, you're closing down. Now they've discovered fracking. They are closing coal down, basically, but they've found another way of doing it. So each leader has different political problems. In India, they used to say, well, you are the beggars that actually poison the world. Why the hell should we cooperate trying to control it? Well, I'm afraid it'll affect India, China, Europe as well. So I believe you've got to find a framework. I'm a trade union negotiator, I'm a compromiser, just find agreement. The legal framework can be done like Britain's done. Say in Cyprus, you develop some of your proposals on environment, you put them into your own legislative framework, and that becomes statutorily enforced. You, in Cyprus, have the law that governs what the environment. We do that in every one of the countries, but each country internationally, that's what we have to agree, sets a target for the carbon. And then we have an international body to check that you're doing it. It's one thing to promise things, you've got to make sure you do it, and then we set the targets along the way. I think that will handle the sensitivity of the legal requirement, which is forced on us, because the American president has made clear he can't get any law through Congress. I don't think it's limited to environment, but he's got a problem. So he's going to do it by his powers. The Chinese are not going to agree with something that the Americans don't accept, that framework. So it all leads us to common sense to get the legal framework in a statutory enforced domestic way by each country doing it, but globally facing up to the obligations of targets in cutting carbon in order to meet the concerns of the scientists that if we allow carbon to increase the way it was, we'll face the terrible consequences that will come from that.
You're hoping that, I presume, the Council of Europe itself will adopt these suggestions. And then what happens? Because the next big environment meeting is in Paris. When?
Yes, in Paris, that's the end of the 5-year period, so that's 2015. But in between, we've got this year. The UN General Secretary is very concerned about this, Ban Ki-moon, so he's calling a conference later in this year. There are various ones I'm going to this year in Mexico. So we're all working to find an agreement. What's happened in the Council of Europe? I'm the first one to get 46 nations to agree this kind of compromise. It is our policy at the moment, and that's what we're confirming here in Cyprus as the one way forward. So we've only got about 12 months to get the formula accepted and for the leaders to raise their heads, particularly in Europe. Europe's key here, because if America and China are coming to some understanding and agreement, China won't want to be seen as one of the two big powers deterring for the rest. Europe is crucial. Europe goes bigger than America in population size. It is wedded to the concept of the environment thing. We want them now to come to this new formula, one of compromise, but keeps the show on the road. What I'm concerned about is failure, and we must stop that. Europe, including Cyprus, has a great opportunity to broker the deal.
And it should do. Connie Hedegaard is probably one of the most sort of hard-working commissioners, I think, who is passionate about her remit. What sort of role can she play in this?
Well, I'll tell you what, the women are more passionate than the men in these cases. It's the same with the UN person in charge of the environment. But what worries us about Europe, to a certain extent, the Commission's going, isn't it? Who's going to be the person then in charge of these in Europe? And indeed, we're in those last few months. Will the Commission have got itself together? So I'm trying to say legislators have got to get in and pressure their government. And these are legislators in the committee, and I'd be saying to each one of them, you have a go at your government and force them on the timetable problem now to come to what is a common sense agreement. Because if America and China don't sign up to international legal framework called the Kyoto legal framework, you haven't got one. Choices, does it collapse or do we find a compromise? I'm offering a compromise, and I'm saying to the legislators in this world, your governments are scared to stand up a bit and be counted. Get onto them and say this is the only way forward. Nobody wants further failure like Copenhagen.
Lord Prescott, former British Deputy Prime Minister, who now sits on the Committee of the Council of Europe. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.